Welcome to the Story Lab. Today, we are taking another look at J.R.R. Tolkien's magnificent world. As you know, Tolkien made up an entire mythological backstory for his world, beginning with the very creation of the universe, or actually a bit earlier. However, as Tolkien's notes, that have since been published, show, he was never quite finished with that backstory and still wanted to make it better. Today, we will try to do the same. We are going to work on a bit of Silmarillion worldbuilding. Let's start by reviewing the creation story in the Silmarillion. The Valar first created the world and the universe, but Melkor hindered them, so they sent him away. Melkor returned in secret, creating Utumno, a gigantic fortress in the north. Melkor destroyed the first lights of the world, the two lamps, destroying many things and forever upsetting the symmetry the Valar had given to the world. Also destroyed was the island of the Valar in the middle of the world. The Valar were so shocked by the consequences of their war, that they did not dare go to war against Melkor again. The Valar then moved to Valinor, creating the two trees to light that land. The elves awoke in a faraway land though, with the only light being that of the stars. When the Valar discovered the elves, they brought them to Valinor to live there in peace, but they needed to get rid of Melkor first and so battled him once more. This time they destroyed Utumno, changing the world once more. Later, Melkor, who had been freed again, destroyed the two trees as well. Fleeing back to one of his former outposts, the Valar then used the last leftover fruits and flowers of the two trees to create the sun and the moon, which originally both crossed over the horizon and then were put in their new relative positions. Much later in the timeline, the people of the island of Numenor attacked Valinor, prompting a change of the world, where the lands of Valinor were removed and the world as whole made round. Now, as hinted at before, Tolkien did not seem entirely happy with that story. Going through some of his notes in the form of the book Nature of Middle-earth, we can deduce that the biggest problem that Tolkien had with his world-building were depicting a flat Earth even though it was long since proven that the Earth is round, not having the sun as the center of the world or of the solar system from the beginning, and finally, making these points more accurate while still retaining the mystical parts of his lore, such as the elves having a special connection to the stars, or the sun and moon only appearing after the death of two trees, which he tried to explain by having the sunlight blocked, etc. Now, what can we do with this basis? A major concern for Tolkien was to make his mythology more accurate to the real Earth. In doing so, he had to come up with completely new base concepts of how the celestial bodies came to be, etc. We will take a different approach. We are going to leave the story as it currently is in the Silmarillion, but reinterpret what it is saying using modern astrophysical knowledge. This makes sense since in the lore the mythology was recorded by humans, who heard it from elves, who heard it from the Valar. Each group would have simplified the knowledge they had for the next recipient, so the mythology does not have to be taken literally. If that is our plan, let's put together some of our modern astrophysical knowledge about Earth. The Earth is part of a solar system of 8 planets, the center of which our star, the Sun herself. The Earth is the only habitable planet in the solar system, though Mars fits many of the requirements as well. The Sun and Earth were created around the same time from interstellar dust and gases. The Sun is powered by nuclear fusion, a common and very efficient way to free energy in the universe. The Earth orbits around the Sun, whereas the Moon orbits around Earth. The Sun is only one of many stars in the galaxy, which in turn is only one of many galaxies in the universe. It is assumed that every star has planets, but life has not been found on any planet other than Earth. This astrophysical knowledge shall be our first ingredient for today's experiment. To that we add Tolkien's story in the Silmarillion and ideas from Tolkien's notes from Nature of Middle-earth. And before we forget it, we also add the following rule. We may recontextualize the story as written in the Silmarillion, but not change it completely. Okay, this is going to be a bit complicated, but luckily the lab has produced some graphics to help us understand it. Let's begin the tale. This is how the world of J.R.R. Tolkien came to be and was changed over time, explained to someone who understands modern astronomy. In the beginning, the Valar created all cosmic objects out of space dust, including many stars, that fill the skies. One place among the vastness, they chose to be their home and that of the children of Iluvatar. This place they called Arda, and they built it out of many worlds, that were arranged in a disk. It was what we now call the solar system. Originally, the Valar designed the system with two stars named Iluin and Ormal, that would circle around the system on the furthest orbit, thus illuminating all the worlds of Arda evenly. Into the gravitational center of the system, however, they placed their own homestead, the Isle of Almarin, a disk world. However, Melkor, who wanted Arda for himself, hid under the ice of the third planet in the system. There, he built the fortress of Utumno. The Valar did not notice him, because they were concerned with all the other worlds as well. They intended to make each of these worlds a paradise. Melkor had other ideas though. Coming out of his hiding place, he moved the two stars out of their orbit, having them plunge through the system. This caused severe destruction to almost every world of Arda, as gravitational disturbances and the immense heat destabilized the entire system. The Valar were barely able to stop the destruction by destroying the stars. In the end, all but one of the planets was made barren and unable to support life. The Isle of Almarin was also destroyed and the symmetry of Arda was lost forever. Following the destruction of most of the disk-like Arda, the Valar moved to the third planet to be in close proximity to Melkor, though they were afraid of attacking him once more, fearing to lose the last world as well. Instead, they made their home Valinor into a beautiful land, a representation of what every world could have been like. In time, the Valar accepted that Arda was now only one world and stopped referring to the rest of the system as Arda. Later they would call it Ilmen. During these times, Valinor was illuminated by the two trees. The trees could not illuminate the rest of the third world, but did shine on the other destroyed planets in the system, making them appear like moving stars in the sky, which is how the elves first saw them, when they awoke. The Valar explained the world to the elves as a disk with a center, that was not the planet now referred to as Arda. To give the elves an idea, they called the plane of the ecliptic an ocean. And that is how the elves have always explained it. However, as we all know, the two trees were eventually destroyed and the world was dark once more. Then, the Valar created two new lights, the sun and the moon. Originally, they intended for the two lights to circle the planet, just like Iluin and Ormal had so long ago. However, to allow night to return to the planet, Viada changed her plan, so that only the moon would circle Arda. The sun was placed into the middle of the system instead, the place where Almarin had once been. And her power was greatly increased, to the level that Iluin and Ormal had once had. The elves, now already in Middle-earth, found their own explanation for why the sun and moon moved differently. Not knowing of the Earth's rotation, they came up with the idea that the sun was transported beneath the Discworld. Similarly, interpreting Ilmen as an ocean still, they assumed that the now much more visible destroyed world that we now call Venus was actually Eärendil traveling the vast sea. Hundreds of years later, the men of Numenor learned directly from residents of Valinor that the Earth was round and reinterpreted the story, that the Earth was made round at some later date, namely during the destruction of Numenor. It was in fact true, that Arda was changed during that time. Iluvatar removed the continent of Valinor, thus shrinking the planet. The disk remained intact though. And so, we arrive at the current state of the world. The lands of Valinor are removed from our plane of existence and can only be reached by those who are allowed to travel there. The solar system has only one habitable planet but also a number of barren ones. The sun is the center of the system, while the moon has lost its ability to shine. Early human civilizations were fascinated by the moon and the sun's interaction, especially the solar eclipses. Eventually, such observations of the sky allowed them to realize the positions and movements of the celestial bodies and led to the rise of modern astronomy, allowing us today to reinterpret the old stories of Discworlds, lanterns, and oceans between different planets. That is the entire story. But let us make a few remarks on the calendars or the measuring of time in this world. In the Silmarillion and other parts of Tolkien's world building, a distinction is made between the long years of the trees and the short years of the sun. 1 tree year equals 144 sun years. This could also be explained with this new world building. The long years were how long it took for the 2 original stars to orbit once around their common center of gravity. When those lights were destroyed, the Valar kept the system in place, but when they created the sun, the life cycles of the planet had changed to how long it took for it to orbit the center of gravity, i.e. the sun. This makes sense, since the Earth is much closer to the sun than Iluin and Ormal would have been. Wonderful. One could say, Tolkien's story was better than he had realized before, because this world building works perfectly. Let's summarize. The Valar originally created 2 lights that circled the entire disc-shaped world, which at the time consisted of many planets. Melkor destroyed the 2 original lights and with it most of the solar system, shrinking the inhabitable part of Arda to only be the 3rd planet. Later, when the 2 trees were gone, the Valar built Sun and Moon and wanted them to circle around the smaller Arda, but changed their mind and instead placed the sun at the center of the system to allow for nights on Earth. The elves, at that time in Middle-earth, tried to bring this new reality in line with what they had previously heard about the Discarda, thus creating the idea of a Discworld. Only much later, through astronomy, did they manage to determine the true placement of the celestial bodies and understand the true meaning of the Valar's stories about the disc-shaped world. Please remember that everything presented here is simply the results of an experiment. No part of this presentation is intended as a correction of an existing story or claims to be the real story. The selection or omission of any parts of the source material is not to be understood as commentary, positive or negative, on the original productions. These are simply thoughts and experiments based on existing material, and none of it could be created without the work of all those involved in creating the original works. As with any scientific result, you may utilize any of the story ideas that resulted from these experiments for your own experiments or production, while citing this experiment as its source. It is now closing time for our lab. Goodbye, until next time.